He walked into class ready to learn, not to prove his worth. For weeks, whispers followed him. Too confident, too quiet, too sure of numbers that baffled others. Then came the day the professor decided to make a point. A smirk, a marker, an equation scrawled across the board so complex it twisted like a maze. The class laughed. He didn't. What they didn't know was that the moment was about to flip. Power, pride, and prejudice colliding in front of everyone. Because sometimes the hardest problems aren't written on a board, they're written on people's hearts.
Marcus had always found peace in numbers. While others struggled to make sense of equations, he saw patterns, rhythm, beauty, and logic. As one of the few black students in his university's advanced statistics program, he carried both pride and pressure. Every glance in the lecture hall reminded him he stood out, though he never meant to. His mornings began the same, hood up, headphones on, campus alive with voices that sometimes whispered louder than words. To most, he was quiet, maybe shy. To his professor, he was a question mark that didn't fit the answer key. That semester, a single glance at the course schedule changed everything. Applied Probability, Professor H. Miller. Students spoke his name with a mix of fear and admiration. A genius, they said, and ruthless. Marcus didn't think much of it until the first lecture. The way the professor's eyes lingered on him a little too long, the slow, deliberate smile that wasn't quite kind. Something in the air felt charged, like static before a storm. Marcus couldn't name it, but he felt it. An invisible test had already begun.
Weeks into the semester, Marcus began to notice the pattern. Each time he raised his hand, the professor would pause just long enough for attention to settle before calling on someone else. When Marcus finally got a turn, the tiny tremor of irritation in the professor's voice made the air heavy. If he answered too well, the room went painfully silent. If he stumbled, even slightly, a faint chuckle would echo from somewhere in the back. Still, Marcus tried to push past it. He studied harder, stayed after class, asked thoughtful questions. Knowledge had always been his refuge. But lately, every step into that lecture hall felt more like walking into a test he wasn't supposed to pass. He began to sense what the real subject was, and it wasn't statistics. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling exam, the professor projected the grade distribution on the screen. The top score gleamed bright. "A perfect 100, he announced, eyes scanning the room before locking onto Marcus. "Surprising." A few students smirked. Marcus forced a smile, pretending the compliment wasn't lined with disbelief. That moment should have been triumph. Instead, it tasted like humiliation disguised as praise. From then on, the challenges became sharper. Pop questions aimed directly at him, trick problems layered with sarcasm, group projects where teammates forgot to include his contributions. Even in study sessions, his brilliance was doubted, explained away as luck. And slowly, silent doubt began to crawl under his skin. He wondered if excelling was making things worse. Then, one gray Thursday morning, it happened. The professor opened class with a smirk and an invitation that felt like a trap. "Let's see who's really ready for graduate-level thinking," he said, spinning a marker in his hand. He drew an equation so complex it looked more like art than math, symbols colliding in impossible combinations. Murmurs rippled through the room. "No one can solve that," someone whispered. The professor turned toward Marcus. "Perhaps our resident prodigy can enlighten us." The room went still. All eyes found him. Every ounce of air felt weighted with expectation, or maybe suspicion. Marcus sat frozen, heart pounding. He could almost hear the message beneath the words, "Prove you belong." Something inside him steadied. Slowly he stood. He wasn't sure if it was pride, anger, or exhaustion that pushed him, but he walked to the board. The marker trembled slightly in his hand as he stared at the symbols, an impossible wall of arrogance inked in black. Behind him, the professor folded his arms. Around him, whispers tangled with doubt. Marcus took a breath, each exhale anchoring him deeper into resolve. He had spent years building strength inside silence. Now it was time to speak in the only language that demanded respect, the language of proof. As the room held its breath, he wrote the first line.
The chalk squealed against the board as Marcus worked, each stroke carving tension into the room. At first, his movements were cautious, checking, rewriting, calculating twice. Then confidence slipped through his fingers like a rhythm remembered in his bones. Numbers flowed into patterns, patterns into logic, logic into brilliance. The professor's smirk began to falter. He shifted, arms crossing tighter, jaw clenching every time Marcus connected another step. Students leaned forward, their disbelief turning into something else. Awkward silence, maybe. Guilt. No one dared whisper now. When Marcus wrote the final symbol, he stopped. For a second, no one breathed. He stepped back, chalk dust on his fingers, pulse thundering in his ears. The equation, once meant to humiliate him, now stood flawless, undeniable. That, he said quietly, is your solution. The professor stared at the board, then at Marcus. His pride wavered under the weight of proof. Instead of acknowledgement, he forced a thin smile. Lucky guess, he muttered. Marcus's chest tightened. After everything, after the unspoken bias, the endless proving, he still wasn't allowed to own his brilliance. He expected applause, or at least silence, but instead he saw it, the same disbelief dressed in bitterness. Something inside him broke, quietly, firmly. He turned back to the board and underlined his answer once, chalk leaving a bold white mark that cut straight across the professor's illusion of control. Behind him, a gasp rippled through the class. Marcus didn't need validation anymore. The truth was right there, written in equations that couldn't lie. For the first time, the professor looked away. The board gleamed, the room buzzed, and in that charged silence, one fact became impossible to erase. The moment meant to shame Marcus had become the one he'd be remembered for. The same test designed to expose his weakness had revealed everyone else's. When the bell rang and students filed out, Marcus stayed back for a moment, staring at the empty board. The proof still glowed faintly under the fluorescent lights. His proof, his voice in numbers. He gathered his things slowly, replaying every moment from the smirk to the silence. Pride and exhaustion tangled in his chest. He hadn't just solved an equation, he had solved a deeper riddle. How much strength it takes simply to be seen. Word spread across campus within days. Some called it inspiring. Others tried to downplay it as luck or attitude. The professor never apologized, but something in his classes changed. His tone, his gaze, the unspoken barrier that had once loomed so tall. Marcus had forced recognition not through anger, not through confrontation, but through excellence that couldn't be ignored. Still, the win felt complicated, because Marcus knew it shouldn't take a public spectacle to receive basic respect. He had proven what he already knew, that brilliance has no color, that dignity shouldn't require defense. Yet, across campuses and workplaces, millions of people were still walking into rooms where they had to prove the same thing over and over again. As Marcus walked out of the lecture hall for the last time, he didn't take one final look back. He didn't need to. The formula was still there, carved in chalk and memory. A quiet reminder that sometimes justice doesn't arrive with applause, but with truth too clear to erase. And as that truth echoes far beyond one classroom, it leaves us with a question that refuses to fade. How many more prodigies must rewrite history on their own just to be believed in the present?